Seibert. With me is Ali Bajwa, Adedoyin Luwaji, Simin, Yook, and John Ede. We'll be presenting our work that we did for Free the Slaves and the community resistance tool that we developed. Before we begin, we'd just like you to turn your attention to this short video.
Free the Slaves is an international non-governmental organization involved in the global fight to end modern slavery. They work in 8 countries across 3 continents, including Ghana, where they have a presence in 34 communities. According to the International Labor Organization, 2018 closed with an estimated 40 million people around the world living under conditions of modern slavery. 25% of those victims are children under the age of 18. In Ghana, slavery is most frequently found in the fishing industry around Lake Volta, the world's largest man-made lake. Of the 1,601 households surveyed in communities around the lake, over a third contained a victim of trafficking or slavery-like conditions. Approximately 20,000 children are enslaved in the fishing industry, and those children, some as young as 5 years old, are often forced to dive underwater with no safety equipment to untangle nets and lines, whether they can swim or not. Many do not return to the surface. Free the Slaves and their partner organizations work to liberate slaves and empower communities to build resistance to the social and economic vulnerabilities that allow traffickers to exploit them in the first place. Empowerment is essential to maintaining freedom, as survivors who lack an education and marketable skills are vulnerable to re-enslavement. Free the Slaves provides grassroots support and livelihood training to ensure survivors who break free stay free. The need to more effectively measure a community's level of resistance was the main objective of our global policy project.
Thank you for watching, and I will turn the floor over to Simin now, who will discuss the initial tool that Free the Slaves had used.
Good morning. So our project consisted of working with the Monitoring, Learning, and Evaluation Department of the Free the Slave, revising one of the 8 data collection tool, which is the community resistance tool. So community resistance tool, in its original form, captures the main features of the 4 pillars of the community liberation model, which include the education mobilization, liberation, care and reintegration, socioeconomic status, and the rule of law. The economic, education and mobilization pillars aims to measure the level of education and mobilization of the vulnerable community and its members who don't know about their basic human rights and accept the condition of the forced labor. The liberation, care, and reintegration measures how much rescued survivors have reintegrated into a safer environment and if they're still at risk of being re-trafficked. The rule of law pillars aims to assess the adequacy of the protection of the law provides to the victims and the accessibility of the services and the awareness that the communities have of them. Finally, the socioeconomic security pillars aims to assess the level of education, healthcare, and vocational training and savings club that act as counterbalances to the vulnerabilities that leads to the slavery. This tool was designed to produce the holistic score that measures the community's resistance against the slavery, and this score would allow the Free the Slave to track the progress of their work of each individual communities, and it supports the evaluation of the long-term impact of the organization's work within these communities. However, during our initial conversation with our client, we were able to identify that the community resistance tool employed by the Free the Slave lacked the robustness, and the resulting index, which indicates the resistance level of the communities to resist the slavery, has low reliability and validity. Our role was to, therefore, review the methodology to identify how Free the Slave administered the tool, which is done through a local NGO called International Needs Ghana. So in order to conduct our research, we have paid 2 weeks visit to Ghana in December. We've met the community members and other stakeholders and the local NGO, International Needs Ghana, who were able to contribute largely to our research. Now I'd like to invite Ali to talk about the evolution of our tool. Thank you.
Thank you, Simin. So, as Simin mentioned, STS organizes its interventions along these 4 pillars. However, in our initial conversation with the client, it became clear when they were able to capture the community's state of well-being at a point in time, they were not able to do it over time. Therefore, we decided to incorporate the element of resilience within our tool. Resilience is the capacity of a system to absorb a disturbance and reorganize and to maintain the same function, structure, and feedbacks. So resilience gives us a lens through which to look at the shocks and stresses, the impacts of shocks and stresses on a socio-ecological system. So once we incorporate resiliency, we believe that we'll be able to get a snapshot of the community over longer timescales, a snapshot of their well-being. At this stage, the tool comprises of a focus group survey and built on the 4 pillars. We worked with the client based on their learnings from using the original tool and incorporated a household survey within our tool. So this is our tool now as it stands. The foundation is built on a household survey and a focus group survey. Bonus points for anybody who gets the Monty Python reference. Once we had this tool, we jumped into the field and began a field work. I would like to call John to talk more about field work.
So keep in mind that we arrived in Ghana with our tool built entirely from literature and completely theoretical, still containing the focus group survey and household survey. Our objective was twofold. First, we needed to test the tool for functionality, and then we were going to test it for effectiveness. By functionality, we knew the social characteristics that we wanted to measure with the questioning, but we had no idea how it would be received and interpreted. We needed to deploy the question and see what the response in the seats of our respondents. For effectiveness, we needed to know that the tool had the capacity to actually measure the resistance level to slavery in the community. We're built up to visit 4 sites, so we split our process into 2. In the first 2 communities, we tested for functionality. What we did was that we asked the questions, weighed the responses, and made tweaks to the questioning. After that process, we had debriefs with our clients, IMGH and FTS, and with meetings that we held in between, we also tweaked the questions and found a new set of questioning for the tools to test for the effectiveness. In the last 2 communities, we rolled the questions out. We actually just rolled the questions out to get a resistance level score for the community. At this stage, we're ready to return to the lab to finish the perfection of our tool. And the vice also tell us what the outcome of this process was.
Thank you, John. So, as with any field work, there's always snags along the way. So, some of the issues that we ran into, you can see limited time. The communities were pretty rural, took a lot of commuting time to get there, a couple hours sometimes. We would only have about an hour and a half to 2 hours in each community. That was fine to run the focus groups in, but it was an issue for the household surveys that we developed. Obviously, a household survey, you want to go door to door, that kind of thing. We had to run the household survey in a focus group kind of format, which meant going to each respondent in the group, trying to ask them questions. That limited the amount of responses we could get. The rule of law and education mobilization pillars, we found that people didn't really know the issue behind them, so we had difficulty getting any good data from that. We had to, what we found is that with rule of law, as an example, the people didn't really communicate with the police. If they wanted to get contact with the police, they would go through their elders, through the community child protection committees, or through the NGO. So we had to take those back to the drawing board. The other issue we ran into is that the chiefs and elders often dominated the focus group. In each community has an elder or a chief that sits on that committee, and they would sort of not try to, but they would sometimes take over the conversation. In one instance, one of our clients was on his hands and knees begging the chief to please shut up. Which he did, only after he got to say one more thing, which was really about 5 more things. So after those lessons learned, we came back here, and Doyin will talk about the revisions and the updates that we made post-field work.
So, our final tool was informed by beta testing of the tool in the 4 communities we visited in Ghana and the focus group meetings we had with the Community Child Protection Committee called the CCPC and International Needs Ghana. We acknowledge that our beta testing had small samples, and just as Ross mentioned, the education, mobilization, and rule of law pillars yielded the least useful results. So, based on this, the methodology needed to be improved. Next, we incorporated the knowledge, attitude, and practices methodology into our education, mobilization, and rule of law pillars. This was to ensure that the more robust profile of the communities will emerge with respect to knowledge and practices along these 2 pillars. Also, we observed that there was difficulty in interpretation of the questions on psychosocial resilience, especially across different cultural contexts. So, the questions on psychosocial resilience in the final tool has been effectively simplified to capture the desired result and to ensure ease of interpretation. So next, we updated the Facilitator's Guide, which builds on FTS's adaptation guide. We also included a guide for implementation of the household survey alongside evaluation metrics. We developed formatted Excel sheets with templates for data cleaning and calculation procedures to arrive at the Community Resistance Index. Based on our field experiences and understanding of financial and time constraint, we recommend that FTS should still use the partner NGOs to implement the tool, to administer the tool once a year. One of the recommendations we have for the index is that if a community scores like between 80 to 100 for both focus group and household survey, like on the average, the community should be, and also if the community scores over 80% in the resilience section, the community can be classified as resistant. Next, we move to implementation, and Ali will help us take a look into the future.
Thank you, Doyin. So looking at the future, one of the first questions we had to ask ourselves in the evaluation was, how do we weight the pillars? Are all of them weighted equally, or do we weigh them by funding? So in some communities, in a capstone project, there was a recommendation to do it through funding. However, we believe if this should be done only if the funding is according to the community's context, so the importance of the pillar to that context. If that is not the case, we believe it might affect the cost-culture comparison between the scores. Therefore, we recommend for now weighting all the pillars equally with further research on this front. The second question, and this was raised in the field. So while we were in the field, we recognized the amazing work that the FTS partner NGOs like International Needs Ghana does on a very limited budget. So naturally, we asked ourselves, what would happen if FTS did not have such a good NGO to work with? Or what if an NGO backs out? Or what if FTS moves to a community where there is no partner NGO to work with? How would this tool be implemented and evaluated? So currently, FTS, for example, in Ghana has these community child protection committees. We believe these child protection committees can be trained to carry out the evaluation process. This will not only empower the community and increase buy-in, it will also address one of the other major concerns of our client, which is the long-term resilience. So incorporating that, we feel is not that difficult and would help them significantly. So back to our final tool. Our final tool is an amalgamation of best practices, literature review, and our own findings in the field. We do recognize that we did not have the chance to implement the revised tool. We would love to do that. However, we still feel that our findings can significantly contribute to the great work that FTS does in the field in Ghana and across the world. Thank you. Now we just like to call Ross.
Before you give us a round of applause, we just want to give a round of applause to our client, particularly Kabi, Bismarck, and Joha in Ghana, for letting us anywhere near their work, and for being so accommodating and putting so much of our itinerary and logistics together. Couldn't have done it without them. And here we want to thank Shashi, Corinne, Marcelo, and Karen for your guys' support all along the way. Wouldn't have happened without you guys either. So thank you, and thank you all for listening.
Great, thanks. It was really wonderful to hear about this project. I just have a couple of more empirical questions to understand how you shape the survey and eventual instrument design. The first one is, how do you define a community? Is this based on administrative boundaries or on self-identification? How are you distinguishing that? Because you're rating an entire collectivity, and it would be useful to know what the boundaries of that are. The second question is that you have the numerical scale, right, of communities becoming presumably more resistant, but does that account for the possibility of change in the opposite direction? It seems that there's a presumption that once communities are on this pathway, they will necessarily move higher up the scale. But how do you account for people perhaps moving back down the scale, and especially would communities then no longer be included in future surveys if they reach the 80 to 100 mark, and then how would you account for possible changes in the other direction?
So I'll take the second question first, if that's all right. In terms of accounting for change towards the opposite direction, that's why in the final index, we categorize community as resistant, not only if it scores high on the index, but also high on the resilience scale. So resilience, basically the questions in the resilience section are shaped to see the community's resilience over a longer time scale, not just a period in time. So our belief is that if the community is resilient, it will stay so over time. However, there's no communities can regress and they can go down the scale. So in the previous iterations of the tool, some communities do score less over years, but we have included resilience into that section. So potentially, resilience would also score lower if the communities are going down. So that community would score on the lower on the resilience section too. And the first question was regarding how to define the communities. Was it how FTS identifies the communities they work in?
Sure. Is it an administrative unit, for instance, a ward or a municipality? Is it, the last group talked a lot about ethnicity, right? It doesn't have an ethnic or other kind of demographic basis. Because you're evaluating these collectivities as a whole, right? So presumably there's some rubric for establishing some sense of commonality amongst the people who live in that.
So the way we work in Ghana, FTS, because FTS operates across the world. In Ghana, they work in fishing communities. So a lot of them are sometimes informal communities on the banks of Lake Volta. So what FTS does is works with its partner NGOs to see if they have any incidents of trafficking in the region, and then they go into these communities to start their work, to start the interventions.
Also, the communities in Africa, they're formed with the as a clan, like a tribe. So these communities they have a chief, and then the community would be established or formed in that way. So this is how the communities are formed. It's kind of unofficial, but also an official jurisdiction. So yeah, this is how the communities is formed.
Hi, thanks so much for a great presentation. Could you tell us more about the role of the government of Ghana and the relationship between Free the Slaves and the government?
The government is supportive of the project. They actually identified that Free the Slaves, the partnership that they have, is coming off the signatories that the government has to the charter, the UN Convention on Child Protection. So they recognize FTS as a non-governmental player in that industry. They provide support by giving administrative support. For instance, in the care and liberation part of interventions, the government provides the police hospital free for rescue slaves. In that regard, they provide logistical support, but they do not fund any of the projects that FTS has.
Okay, well, you know I have a ton of questions. But first I want to thank you all, and I also want to let everybody else know that part of this presentation was also shared at the Society for Applied Anthropology last week with pointing out that university capstone and CSO, civil society organizations, can really work together to develop and improve on tools and things like this that really provide a contribution to those NGOs. So just sharing that with everybody else. But one of the premises, the question that I have for you all today is that the premise of this tool was that it would be applicable to the Free the Slaves work across all of their countries. So that addresses the question you're asking about what's the community need and your questions about what does government need. And I'm wondering how you have set up your end product to be applicable across different environments, different contexts, different types of slavery, different government policies, etc. Thanks.
So one of our deliverables, and Ross can add to it afterwards, one of our deliverables within the tool is an adaptation guide, which helps FTS adopt its tool across communities. So we have built a general tool, which is quite extensive, but we also have given guidelines on how to adapt different sections within the tool for every community.
In particular for John and and Nuni, as Nigerians coming to work in Ghana, what were you most surprised by with the assumptions that you went in with and necessarily working with just this organization and working with Ghanaians in general, and what were you least surprised by?
Well, sorry. I won't really say that I was surprised about it. One thing that we discussed about as a theme was the realization that the issue should be seen more as something that is happening like at a local level and not to be seen from a Western perspective, because like there are ways that our researchers, especially when we're studying something about a country in Africa, can tend more towards like the Western trajectory, and that was one thing that every team member was like conscious of, and we tried as much as possible to make sure that we adapted it to the local context. And just as Ali also mentioned, like our adaptation guide, we also like try to ensure that the tools are tailored to work in other countries, like in Latin America, where FTS works.
If I might ask, I'm also Nigerian. The first thing that struck me about this whole thing was when I heard slaves in Africa, in Ghana. I flashed back to early history. But the surprise was that what we find to be normal practice in our cultural settings is actually categorized as slavery when you're going deep into it. So that was my biggest surprise. The learning here is that besides children trapped in the fishing industry, domestic work, and all sorts of child labor fits the description that the ILO quantifies slavery to be. So that's my biggest surprise in the whole visit.
Yeah, like as we all know, sometimes children living with relatives is like culturally acceptable, like, and it's the norm. It happens a lot in Africa, but then it's classified as. But when the purpose is to actually exploit them and use them like as child laborers, then even though it is the norm culturally, it classifies as child slavery.
Thanks for a wonderful presentation and very impressive ambition in building the index. I was struck by your statements of the lack of robustness and low reliability of what free the slaves were already using, and hence the rationale for developing an index. Do you have any sense of confidence that the resulting index that you've now built is more reliable, more effective, more functional in some sense? And what's the basis for that confidence?
So first I'll say that we can't be totally confident. One of the issues that we had obviously was coming back and incorporating some new methodologies into what we'd already done. The CAP methodology specifically means we didn't get to run that in the field and see how those questions affected it. But we are confident that it will be more valid in the future with the addition of the household survey. What they did before was run the focus group with the CPCCs, and that was the extent. In the future, what they'll be able to do with the household survey is not just get a sense of the CPCC's work. They'll also be able to get a sense of individual community members' opinions of their work and individual community members and households' current status. And so the idea here is to be able to compare those and see, is there a disconnect between what that group is doing and how individual households in the community are doing.
Also like to add that, just as John mentioned earlier, the tool we took to Ghana was built upon literature and also on the community resistance tool that FTS uses at the moment. And based on that, we were still able to discover some thoughts like education mobilization and rule of law pillar were not yielding the right results, and that is actually what they've been using before now. So we believe that using the CAP methodology, for example, the knowledge, attitude, and practices methodology to redefine those two pillars will elicit more, will elicit the desired result and will ensure more reliability.
So nothing from the client themselves about satisfaction with the resulting product?
Thank you for that. So, incorporating CAP methodology while we were on the field, so this was what FTS was already thinking. So they had this mindset of, we have identified this weakness, potentially this could be a solution. So we were constantly in touch with the client, going back and forth, so aligning our work with their interests. From the feedback we've gotten from our client, they're happy with it.
So with the development of the tool to include household surveys, would you be able to also possibly identify the most at-risk households and individuals?
Sorry, can you repeat the back half of that? Identify.
So would you be able to identify with this tool the most at-risk households within those at-risk communities and possibly even individuals?
Thank you, Mark. Welcome back. So yes, that is the goal.
So also, we mandate our clients to do purposeful selection when they actually administer the household survey. So we want to target those vulnerable people. More questions, please.
So you just mentioned that the survey is meant to help identify individual households that may be at risk. So when you're collecting the data with the household survey, do you foresee any challenges with getting accurate responses if they know that they'll be individually identified?
Okay. To clarify, the client uses people that are actually integrated in the community. There's little risk of stigma. But in moving forward, like Ali mentioned, we hope that in the future that the administrators of the tool will be picked from the community. The way the community is run, they're actually villages and small, very small populations. The homogeneity is actually so good that there's no fear of being identified or picked on. From what we have seen, everybody is actually key into eliminating that social problem.
Yeah, and purposeful sampling is, well, apparently the sampling technique that we're proposing is simple random sampling, but purposeful sampling will also take place within the simple random sampling. So it's not only families of victims that are targeted with the household survey, but we want to also ensure that they are represented.
We're actually, sorry, we're at the end of the question and answer session. So thank you.